In the heart of a modern American city, where glass towers reflect the sky and shadows gather in forgotten corners, Dr. Eleanor Hayes sat in her dimly lit office. Rain tapped against the window as she reviewed her notes on her most challenging patient. 20 years as a psychologist had not prepared her for Thomas, a man whose fascination with the Joker had evolved from casual interest to something far more disturbing. His case file lay open before her, filled with transcripts that revealed a mind increasingly drawn to chaos. Eleanor glanced at the framed photo on her desk, her family smiling at a beach, a moment of perfect normalcy that seemed increasingly distant. She had always prided herself on maintaining boundaries between her work and personal life, but Thomas's case had begun to blur those lines. His questions about society's masks and the liberation of chaos echoed in her mind even after sessions ended. "We all wear masks," Thomas had said during their last session, his eyes unnervingly calm. But what happens when the mask becomes more real than what's underneath? The question had lingered in the room like smoke, impossible to wave away. Eleanor had recognized something in his words. Not just delusion, but a distorted reflection of truth that made her uncomfortable. Outside her office window, the city continued its rhythmic existence. People hurried through the rain, faces down, shoulders hunched, each wearing their own version of what Carl Jung would call the persona, that social mask we present to the world. Eleanor wondered how many of them felt the same disconnection Thomas described, that sense of performing rather than living. She turned to her bookshelf and pulled down her worn copy of Jung's The Archetypes and the Collective Unconscious. The pages fell open to a section she had underlined years ago during her doctoral studies. The shadow is a moral problem that challenges the whole ego personality, for no one can become conscious of the shadow without considerable moral effort. The shadow, that repository of everything we deny in ourselves, everything we refuse to acknowledge. Eleanor thought about the Joker, that cultural icon of chaos that had captured Thomas's imagination. Was this character's enduring appeal simply entertainment? Or was there something deeper at work? Was he a manifestation of a collective shadow, given form and voice? Her phone buzzed with a text from her daughter. "Will you be home for dinner?" Eleanor replied with a quick yes before returning to her notes. Thomas's session was scheduled for tomorrow, and she needed to prepare. His fascination with the Joker had intensified recently, coinciding with a deterioration in his personal relationships and increasing isolation. Eleanor closed her eyes, remembering Jung's warning about the danger of projection, how we cast our unacknowledged shadow aspects onto others, seeing in them the darkness we refuse to recognize in ourselves. The Joker, with his painted face and exaggerated smile, was the perfect canvas for such projections. A character designed to embody chaos, to reject society's rules, to laugh at our pretensions of order. The rain intensified, drumming against the window. Eleanor made a decision. Tomorrow, instead of trying to pull Thomas away from his fascination, she would explore it with him. What was it about this character that spoke to him so powerfully? What shadow aspects was the Joker embodying that Thomas, and perhaps many others, needed to confront? As night fell over the city, Eleanor gathered her notes and prepared to head home. She paused at the window, watching the streetlights reflect in puddles below. In each reflection, the light fractured and reformed, order and chaos in constant conversation. Tomorrow, she would begin a journey with Thomas into the shadow realm that the Joker represented, hoping to find a path toward integration rather than destruction. Thomas arrived precisely on time, as always. His external appearance, neatly pressed clothes, carefully combed hair, contrasted sharply with the internal chaos he had described in previous sessions. Eleanor noted this contradiction as they exchanged greetings. The persona at work, maintaining a facade of normalcy while something darker churned beneath. "I've been thinking about our last conversation," Eleanor began, once Thomas had settled into the chair across from her. "About the Joker as a symbol, I'm curious, when did you first feel drawn to this character?" She kept her tone neutral, professional, though her question was a departure from their usual approach. Thomas seemed surprised by the directness, but answered readily. "It wasn't the movies like most people think," he said. "It was during my divorce. I was trying so hard to be reasonable, to be the good guy through all of it. One night, I found myself watching an old Batman cartoon. When the Joker appeared, laughing at everyone's rules and expectations, something clicked. His eyes took on a distant quality. I felt recognized. Eleanor nodded, understanding the psychological mechanism at work. The Joker represents something that exists in all of us, what Jung would call the shadow. Those parts of ourselves that we've repressed because they don't fit with who we think we should be. She watched Thomas carefully as she continued. The shadow isn't inherently evil, but when we refuse to acknowledge it, it can manifest in destructive ways. Outside, the sky darkened as clouds gathered. The office seemed to grow smaller, more intimate, as Thomas leaned forward. That's exactly it. Everyone's so busy pretending. We go to our jobs, we smile at neighbors we hate, we post happy pictures online while feeling empty inside. The Joker just stops pretending. His voice had taken on an intensity that concerned Eleanor. But there's a crucial distinction, she said gently. The Joker doesn't integrate his shadow, he's consumed by it. He surrenders to chaos rather than finding balance. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. Jung believed that acknowledging our shadow is essential for wholeness, but that doesn't mean giving in to our darkest impulses. Thomas's face tightened. But what if those impulses are honest? What if they're more real than everything else? The question hung between them, revealing the dangerous edge of his thinking. Look at our world. People destroying the planet while talking about sustainability. Politicians preaching morality while abusing power. At least the Joker is honest about the madness. Eleanor recognized the rationalization pattern, the way Thomas was using legitimate social critiques to justify a deeper attraction to chaos. The Joker isn't honest, Thomas. He's reactive. There's a difference between acknowledging the hypocrisy in our world and using it as an excuse to abandon all responsibility toward others. Rain began to fall outside, pattering against the window. Thomas stared at the sound for a moment before responding. My wife said I was too controlled, too predictable. She'd left me for someone more exciting. His voice had gone flat. I spent my whole life following the rules. What did it get me? Eleanor felt a chill at the bitterness in his tone. The opposite of rigid control isn't chaos, Thomas. It's balance. Acknowledging all parts of yourself without being ruled by any single aspect. She gestured toward the window. Like that rain, it follows natural patterns, neither completely ordered nor completely chaotic. Thomas fell silent, considering her words. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter. Sometimes I dream about taking off the mask, not becoming the Joker exactly, but stopping the performance. I'm so tired of performing. The vulnerability in his admission shifted something in the room's atmosphere. Eleanor nodded, recognizing a crucial opening. That exhaustion is real. Jung would say it comes from the psychic energy required to keep parts of yourself repressed. But integration is different from surrender. She leaned forward. What if we explore what's behind your fascination? Not to eliminate it, but to understand what it's trying to tell you about yourself. For the first time in their sessions, Thomas's carefully maintained facade cracked. His eyes glistened. I'm afraid of what I might find, he admitted. What if there's nothing good there? What if I'm just empty underneath it all? As their session neared its end, Eleanor felt they had reached a critical juncture. The shadow contains not just our destructive impulses, but also our vitality, our creativity, our passion, she said. The Joker represents what happens when the shadow is only seen as destructive, when we don't recognize its potential for transformation. Thomas stood to leave, pausing at the door. Same time next week? He asked, a new uncertainty in his voice. Eleanor nodded, watching him return his mask before stepping back into the world. As the door closed behind him, she wondered about the millions of others fascinated by the Joker. What collective shadow was this character revealing in American society, and what would it take to integrate rather than be consumed by it? The following week brought unseasonable heat to the city, a stifling blanket that seemed to intensify the underlying tensions Eleanor observed everywhere. On her morning commute, she noticed a new billboard featuring the Joker's face, advertising an upcoming film. His exaggerated smile looming over the gridlocked traffic, where drivers sat isolated in their vehicles, faces tight with unexpressed frustration. In her office, Eleanor prepared for Thomas's session by reviewing Jung's writings on the collective unconscious. That shared psychological substrate that connects all humans through universal archetypes and symbols. The Joker, she realized, had transcended his origins as a comic book villain to become something more profound, a cultural shadow carrier, embodying aspects of modern life that society collectively repressed. Thomas arrived looking more disheveled than usual. He had lost his job 3 days earlier. Corporate restructuring, he explained with a bitter smile. 15 years at the company, and they let me go with a form letter and 2 weeks severance. His carefully constructed persona was visibly cracking under the pressure of this new rejection. I was in the elevator, leaving for the last time, Thomas continued, and I had this thought that was so clear. What if I just started laughing? Not normal laughter, really laughing, like him. Wouldn't that be the appropriate response to the absurdity of it all? He looked at Eleanor, searching for understanding. I didn't do it, but I wanted to. Eleanor nodded, recognizing the psychological mechanism at work. The impulse to laugh in the face of pain is actually deeply human. It's a way of asserting some control when we feel powerless. She paused. The Joker takes this natural response and amplifies it to an extreme, transforming momentary rebellion into a permanent state of war against order. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance. Thomas turned toward the sound before speaking again. I've been thinking about what you said about the collective shadow. It's not just me, is it? There's something about our whole society that's drawn to this character. His insight surprised Eleanor. Thomas was beginning to think beyond his personal identification. Jung would say that when a society represses too much, the shadow doesn't disappear. It grows stronger in the unconscious, Eleanor explained. Look at American culture. We preach success, positivity, achievement. We have no cultural space for failure, for darkness, for admitting when things aren't working. Thomas leaned forward. So the Joker becomes popular because he's expressing something we all feel but can't admit? His eyes were clearer than Eleanor had seen them in weeks, engaged in genuine curiosity rather than defensive justification. Exactly. He embodies our collective frustration with hypocrisy, with systems that claim to be fair but aren't, with the exhaustion of maintaining social masks. Eleanor gestured toward the window, toward the city beyond. But here's the crucial point. Acknowledging these feelings doesn't mean surrendering to them. Integration means holding the tension between order and chaos. Thomas was quiet for a long moment. When I was cleaning out my desk, I found a photo from the company picnic 10 years ago. I was smiling in it, a real smile, not the fake one I've been wearing to work for years. I barely recognized myself. His voice cracked slightly. Something died in me, Eleanor. Long before I lost the job. The raw honesty of his statement hung in the air between them. Eleanor recognized they had reached the heart of the matter, not the Joker as a character, but what he represented, the death of authentic connection in a world increasingly dominated by performance and appearance. Jung believed that confronting the shadow is painful but necessary, Eleanor said gently. When we deny our darker emotions, our anger, our sense of injustice, our desire to break free from constraints, they don't disappear. They go underground and grow more powerful, more distorted. Thomas nodded slowly. Like in Gotham, the more Batman fights to maintain order, the more powerful and extreme the Joker becomes. His analogy revealed a deepening understanding. They're locked in a cycle that can't be broken through force. Yes, Eleanor affirmed, and the same pattern plays out in our psyches. The harder we try to repress certain aspects of ourselves, the more powerfully they erupt when our defenses weaken. She paused, considering how to frame the next question. What would it look like for you to acknowledge your shadow without being consumed by it? Thomas stared at his hands. I don't know. I've spent so long being what everyone else needed me to be. The reliable employee, the stable husband. Even when my marriage was falling apart, I never raised my voice. He looked up, his expression pained. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe she needed to see that I could feel something, anything, strongly enough to break character. Eleanor recognized the profound insight emerging. The shadow contains not just our destructive impulses, but also our passion, our creativity, our ability to set boundaries. When we disown it completely, we lose access to those vital energies. As their session neared its end, Thomas seemed simultaneously exhausted and more present than Eleanor had ever seen him. I've been thinking about painting again, he said unexpectedly. I used to paint in college before I decided it wasn't a practical career path. Eleanor felt a spark of hope at this small but significant shift. That sounds like a powerful way to explore these feelings in a constructive rather than destructive channel. She hesitated, then added, The Joker represents one response to society's constraints. Total rebellion. But there are other responses that don't require destroying yourself or others. As Thomas left, Eleanor watched him walk down the hallway. His posture different, less rigid but somehow more substantial. She turned back to her notes, thinking about the millions drawn to the Joker's chaotic energy. Perhaps what they were really seeking wasn't chaos itself, but release from the exhaustion of denial, a way to acknowledge the shadow that American society had collectively disowned. A month passed, bringing autumn's transformative touch to the city. Leaves turned and fell, a natural cycle of death and renewal that Eleanor often referenced in her work. Thomas had continued his sessions, each one revealing new layers of his relationship with the shadow aspects the Joker represented. Today, Thomas arrived carrying a canvas wrapped in brown paper. I brought something to show you, he said, a nervous energy in his movements as he carefully unwrapped his painting. Eleanor's office filled with color as he revealed the artwork, a striking self-portrait unlike anything she had expected. The painting showed Thomas's face, half in normal lighting and half in shadow, but the shadowed side wasn't depicted as monstrous or Joker-like as Eleanor might have anticipated. Instead, it glowed with deep blues and purples, revealing aspects that seemed more alive, more vibrant than the conventionally lit portion. The technique was raw but powerful, emotion evident in every brushstroke. It's my first attempt at painting in almost 20 years, Thomas explained, watching her reaction carefully. I kept thinking about what you said, about the shadow containing not just darkness, but vitality. I tried to show that. His voice held a tentative pride that Eleanor hadn't heard before. This is remarkable, Thomas, she said, genuinely moved by the visual representation of his psychological journey. You've captured something profound here, the shadow not as something to fear, but as a source of energy and authenticity. She studied the painting's details, noting how the shadowed side contained symbols of creativity and passion that were absent from the more conventional half. Thomas carefully propped the canvas against the wall before sitting down. I've been thinking about why the Joker resonated with me so strongly. It wasn't really about the chaos or the violence, it was about the freedom from pretense. But I'm starting to see there are other ways to be authentic without destroying everything around me. Outside, wind scattered leaves across the street in swirling patterns. Chaos and order in natural balance. Eleanor nodded encouragingly. Jung believed that true individuation requires us to integrate all aspects of ourselves, including those that society might reject. But integration is different from identification. We don't become our shadow, we enter into relationship with it. Thomas looked thoughtful. I started a journal, writing down the thoughts I've always censored. Some of them are angry, some are selfish, some are just tired of performing. He paused. But writing them down makes them less overwhelming. They're just parts of me, not all of me. Eleanor recognized the significant psychological shift this represented. That's exactly the process Jung described, bringing unconscious content into consciousness where it can be examined rather than acted out blindly. She gestured toward his painting. Your art is doing the same thing, giving form to internal experiences that have no other outlet. I showed some of my paintings to my daughter last weekend, Thomas said, a new warmth in his voice. She's 16 now, at that age where she thinks her dad is hopelessly uncool, but she actually sat and looked at them. Really looked. Then she asked if I would teach her. His eyes glistened slightly. It was the first real conversation we've had in years. Eleanor felt a surge of professional satisfaction at this tangible sign of progress. You're creating new channels for connection, authentic ones based on expressing rather than repressing your full self. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. The Joker represents what happens when the shadow erupts without integration. Destructive, chaotic, unable to form genuine connections. You're choosing a different path. Thomas nodded slowly. I still feel drawn to that character sometimes, especially when I see the hypocrisy in the world. But it's different now. More like recognizing a warning sign than wanting to follow his path. He looked out the window at the falling leaves. There's something sad about him now, too. He's trapped in his reaction against society, never able to create anything new. That's a profound insight, Eleanor affirmed. The Joker's freedom is ultimately another form of imprisonment. He's defined entirely by what he opposes. True freedom comes from integration, not perpetual rebellion. As their session continued, Thomas described other small but significant changes in his life. He had joined a local art group, meeting weekly with other amateur painters. He had spoken honestly with his ex-wife for the first time since their divorce, expressing the anger he had previously suppressed. The conversation had been difficult but clarifying, allowing him to begin releasing resentments that had festered for years. I'm not fixed, Thomas acknowledged toward the end of their session. There are still days when everything feels pointless, when I'm tempted to just burn it all down like he would. He glanced at his painting. But I'm starting to see those feelings as messengers rather than commands. They're telling me something needs attention, not that everything needs destruction. Eleanor nodded, recognizing the wisdom in his statement. That's the heart of shadow work, learning to listen to the rejected parts of ourselves without being overwhelmed by them. She looked at the painting again, struck by how it visualized the psychological process they had been discussing. Your art is becoming a bridge between different aspects of yourself. As Thomas prepared to leave, carefully rewrapping his canvas, Eleanor reflected on the broader implications of their work together. The cultural fascination with the Joker revealed a collective hunger for authenticity in an increasingly artificial world. The character's popularity wasn't simply entertainment. It was a symptom of a society desperately needing to acknowledge its shadow. Same time next week? Thomas asked, pausing at the door. Eleanor nodded, noticing how his question now carried anticipation rather than resignation. As he left, she turned to her window, watching the dance of falling leaves outside. Nature's reminder that transformation requires both letting go and new growth. 6 months had passed since Thomas first brought his painting to Eleanor's office. Winter had come and gone, and now spring was breathing new life into the city. Eleanor stood in a small art gallery, surrounded by people sipping wine from plastic cups and discussing the paintings that lined the walls. Thomas's paintings displayed in his first exhibition. The collection was titled Behind the Mask. 15 canvases exploring the tension between persona and shadow, between social expectations and authentic expression. The centerpiece was an expanded version of the self-portrait he had first shown Eleanor, now developed into a triptych that showed a full progression from rigid persona through shadow encounter to a new integration. Eleanor watched from a distance as Thomas spoke with visitors, noting the transformation in his presence. He stood straighter, moved more freely, laughed more readily. Not the manic laughter of the Joker he had once idolized, but the genuine laughter of someone increasingly at home in his own skin. Dr. Hayes. Thomas spotted her and made his way through the crowd. I wasn't sure you'd come. His face showed pleasure at seeing her outside their usual context. I wouldn't have missed it, Eleanor replied warmly. These paintings are remarkable, Thomas. They tell the story of a real psychological journey. She gestured toward the triptych. You've captured something universal here, something many people will recognize in themselves. Thomas nodded, a thoughtful expression crossing his face. That's what I've been discovering. When I talk to people about these paintings, about the process behind them, so many of them understand immediately. It's like we're all carrying the same burden of pretense, just in different forms. They moved through the gallery together, pausing before a painting that depicted a city street scene. At first glance, it appeared to be a realistic urban landscape, but closer inspection revealed subtle Joker-like smiles hidden in unexpected places. In the reflection of a puddle, in the pattern of cracks on a wall, in the arrangement of windows on a distant building. I still think about him, Thomas acknowledged, studying the painting. But differently now. He's become a reminder rather than an escape fantasy, a warning about what happens when we can't find healthier ways to acknowledge our shadow. Eleanor nodded, understanding the psychological integration this represented. Jung would say you've established a conscious relationship with this archetype rather than being possessed by it. That's the essence of the individuation process. A young woman approached, Thomas's daughter, Emma, whom Eleanor recognized from photos Thomas had shared. Now 18, she carried herself with the tentative confidence of someone on the threshold of adulthood. Dad, the gallery owner wants to talk to you about pricing, she said, then noticed Eleanor. Oh, you must be Dr. Hayes. Dad talks about you all the time. After Thomas excused himself, Emma lingered, studying Eleanor with curious eyes. You know, he was in a really dark place before he started seeing you, she said directly. Mom and I were worried. He seemed empty, like he wasn't really there anymore. Eleanor maintained her professional boundaries while acknowledging Emma's observation. Your father has done remarkable work over these months. The changes you're seeing come from his courage in facing difficult truths about himself. Emma nodded, glancing around at the paintings. He's different now. Still my dad, but more, I don't know how to explain it. More present? More real? She smiled slightly. We actually talk now. Like, really talk. About hard stuff, not just surface things. After Emma left to join her father, Eleanor continued through the exhibition, noting how each painting documented a stage in Thomas's psychological development. The final painting in the collection showed a man standing at a crossroads, one path leading toward a chaotic cityscape reminiscent of Gotham, the other toward a landscape where order and wildness existed in balance. The man in the painting was looking toward the balanced path, his stance suggesting movement in that direction. Later, as the event was winding down, Thomas found Eleanor preparing to leave. Thank you, he said simply. Not just for coming tonight, but for everything. For helping me find a different way to face my shadow. Eleanor smiled. You did the difficult work, Thomas. I just provided a framework for understanding it. She gestured toward the paintings. What you've created here will help others recognize their own journey. Thomas nodded, his expression thoughtful. That's my hope. We're all drawn to characters like the Joker because they express something we feel but can't acknowledge. But there are better ways to integrate those feelings than through destruction? He paused. I'm starting a workshop next month. Art therapy for people dealing with depression and anger. Using creativity as a channel for the shadow rather than repression or explosion. As Eleanor left the gallery and walked through the spring evening, she reflected on the broader implications of Thomas's journey. The cultural obsession with the Joker revealed a collective psychological need, a hunger for authenticity in a world of increasing artifice, a desire to acknowledge the shadow aspects of modern American life that were typically denied or projected onto others. The next morning, Eleanor arrived at her office to find a package waiting, a small canvas wrapped in the now familiar brown paper. Unwrapping it, she found a painting of a therapist's office, rendered in warm colors. Two figures sat in conversation, light and shadow balanced around them, neither dominating the other. A card attached read simply, "Some shadows, when acknowledged, become sources of light. Thank you for helping me find mine. Thomas." Eleanor placed the painting on her bookshelf, next to her worn copy of Jung's writings. Outside her window, the city continued its complex dance of order and chaos, of persona and shadow. Millions of people moved through their days, many still captivated by characters like the Joker, who expressed the repressed aspects of their psyches. But Eleanor knew that real transformation came not from surrendering to the shadow, nor from denying it, but from the difficult, courageous work of integration, of acknowledging all aspects of ourselves and finding creative channels for their expression. As she prepared for her first patient of the day, she glanced once more at Thomas's painting, a tangible reminder that even our darkest fascinations can become doorways to greater wholeness when approached with consciousness and compassion. In the painting's background, barely visible unless one looked closely, was the faint outline of a playing card. Not a joker, but a king. Jung would have recognized this symbolism immediately. The archetype of the mature masculine, the integrated self that emerges when shadow and light find their proper balance. Not through destruction, but through the creative act of transformation. As we close this journey through the shadow and light of the human psyche, I invite you to look within. The Joker's enduring appeal isn't simply about chaos or villainy. It's about the parts of ourselves we've been taught to hide, to deny, to push into the shadows. In our polished social media profiles and carefully curated personas, how much of ourselves have we lost? What laughter have we stifled? What rage have we buried? What wild creative energy have we sacrificed at the altar of acceptability? Carl Jung understood that true wholeness doesn't come from perfection. It comes from integration, from acknowledging all parts of ourselves, even those that make us uncomfortable. The shadow isn't something to be feared or destroyed, but something to be recognized, understood, and ultimately transformed. Perhaps this is why we remain fascinated by the Joker. In his distorted mirror, we catch glimpses of our own repressed truth, our frustration with hypocrisy, our exhaustion with pretense, our longing to break free from suffocating expectations. But there are better paths to authenticity than destruction. Like Thomas in our story, we can find creative channels for our shadow aspects, ways to acknowledge our full humanity without losing our connection to others. The next time you feel drawn to the Joker's chaotic energy, ask yourself, what is this attraction trying to tell me about myself? What parts of my own psyche am I refusing to see? What creative potential lies dormant in my shadow? Remember, it's not about wearing a mask or removing it completely. It's about integration, about bringing consciousness to all aspects of who you are, and in doing so, becoming more fully, authentically human. If this exploration of the Joker through Jung's psychology resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What shadow aspects do you recognize in your own fascination with this character? How have you found healthy ways to acknowledge your own shadow? This journey of psychological exploration is just beginning. Subscribe to join us as we continue to examine the deeper meanings behind the characters and stories that captivate our collective imagination. Hit that subscribe button and notification bell to ensure you don't miss our next psychological deep dive. Thank you for taking this journey into the depths of the psyche with me today. Your willingness to explore these profound psychological truths is the first step toward greater wholeness and authenticity. See you in the next video.